One of the most significant theories in newspaper publications is the inverted triangle theory. This outlines what information should be placed where in a newspaper article. By having the most important information first, such as who, why, where, when, how, and what, it allows the reader to stop reading there and still understand the main point of the article. By including this more interesting information first, it leads the reader in. This is known as the anecdotal lead and is closely associated with the inverted triangle. The less important information included at the end tends to be for people who have a specific interest in the article, such as someone who wants to find out more on a website related to the story. Exclusive. This means that only the newspaper concerned can cover the story, as they have bought it for their use only. Box out. A small part of the page shading a different colour to stand out, similar to a puff which promotes features inside the newspaper. Byline. The name of the reporter, sometimes shown with an email address and photo. Caption. These are shown underneath photos, explaining what is happening in the image and adding to the story. Typeface. There are two different types of typeface, sans serif, which is informal, and serif, which is formal. Kicker. A story which stands out on the page through deliberate use of a different font or layout. Lead story, or headline. Simply, this is the main story on the front page and takes up the majority of the front cover. Red tops. These describe down-market tabloids such as The Sun and The Mirror. Standalone paragraph. The first paragraph of the news article, usually around 30 words long and containing the most important information in bold, also called a stand first. Strapline. This is a smaller secondary headline which reveals more information about the story as well as drawing the reader in. More than 85% of all British adults read a local newspaper. 66% read a national paper daily. Local papers are the second largest source of advertising after television. News values help to decide how much coverage a story is given by a certain newspaper and how worthy it is of having this coverage. In my case, I need to consider my young and local audience. Frequency. Newspapers are often published late at night ready for the next day, and therefore it is important that events fit this schedule as well as being recent. Ongoing and long-term events and issues are therefore going to receive less coverage unless there is a sudden change. Because of this, my main article is likely to be something that happened the previous day and not something that's an ongoing issue, as this will bore people, especially if it's something they have already heard about. Negativity and conflict. Bad news is often more dramatic and more controversial than good news. It is more of a talking point and therefore considered more newsworthy in news values. Whilst controversial news is popular, my ideology is not to create a negative perspective on young people and teenagers, and therefore this will be something I carefully consider when deciding what articles to feature. Unambiguity. This concentrates on making the event of the story clear to the audience, without having a complex background to understand before, as well as a story that has a clear interpretation. This is relevant to my newspaper in order not to bore my teenage audience. Personalisation. Readers can relate better to news stories where there is individuals involved as opposed to stories with no human interest in them. I feel it is important to feature my target audience's ages in the stories I use in order to personalise my story as best as possible to my audience. Meaningfulness. This relates to the personalisation in that the audience has identified with the topic and share a similar life with the people involved. This further emphasises the use of teenagers in my newspaper to help my audience relate. Predictability. If an event is already known to be happening, it is likely to be covered. I can relate this to my newspaper by including a mix of both recent shocking events along with predictable events in order to make it as realistic as possible. Proximity. This is important as it concerns how close an event is to the audience as to how valuable it is to be worth publishing. This is particularly important for my newspaper as it is local, and therefore the news must be relevant to the local area. If it is not local news, but regional, national and international, I will ensure it is related back to my local area, whether through people or events.
So here's an episode of the Christmas Eve Eastern Daily Press, which is a local newspaper in my area. Firstly, you can immediately see that it is obviously a season special as it has all these cartoons at the top showing Christmas. You can also see there's a clear house style as it uses the same shade of blue in the name, in the strap line and the bit that says Inside Today, as well as at the bottom of the page. There's a slogan which says the country's biggest selling regional morning newspaper, which is obviously quite a good selling point as clearly it is trusted by many people. There's also a website included for people who want to find out more, as well as Argent, which are the company who published them, including their logo on them to make it look more legitimate. At the bottom of the page there's a list of things that are in the newspaper, including weather, opinion, letters, business and sport, as well as repeating the website at the bottom of the page. The main headline is written in huge letters, but unusually it's not actually connected to the main picture. Now, the main headline is very simple: Storm hits festival travel. It doesn't have any sort of literary techniques in it, but it's simply stating quite a big fact, which has obviously affected quite a lot of people at the time due to the Christmas storm. Then it says full story, pages 8 and 9, to make people read more into the newspaper. The other headline, which is Christmas Cracker, Labrador back home with family after sea drama, is obviously alliteration with Christmas Cracker, as well as quite a sweet picture of some Labradors, with sea drama making it seem like a dramatic story that one would want to read if they like dogs. Also, finally, there is an advert, as well as an Inside Today section which encourages readers to look more into the newspaper. Next we have a copy of the Wyndham Mercury, which is the most local newspaper in my area. Again, this is published by Arch and it included their logo, along with, again, a website. The first thing you notice is a lot of adverts on this page. There's one at the bottom and 2 at the side. This is obviously because it's a local newspaper, and although you can buy it in shops for 60p, a lot of people get it free for their door, so one of the ways they make money is by adverts. Again, the picture is actually separate to the headline, which is perhaps because the headline is Councillor threatened rival after poll defeat, which is obviously a story which wouldn't include a very interesting picture. So instead, Pupils Go on Stage, which is a lot of children in a theatre show, is a more interesting picture to show. They have a caption on the picture saying "Picture Bill Smith," as well as by David Bale on the newspaper article, showing how people are taking credit for what they've written. It's got a similar style of colour to the EDP, with blue being shown at the top of the newspaper on Wyndham as well as on the caption. There is a kicker box with the picture, which not only has the headline and a find out more, but also adds a little bit extra to the page and stands out.
As you can see by the logo included at the bottom, this is a poster advertising the Sun newspaper. Immediately there is a clear ideology that it is both cheap and informative. The point of this poster is to portray how much information you are given for just 30p. The poster is laid out like a receipt, something that everyone recognises and is therefore immediately drawn to. On this receipt, a variety of phrases are used. Slang such as footy put it on level with the target audience, and the personal pronoun you is used many times to directly address this audience. Appealing language which is unmissable and juiciest give the audience a sense of desire, with £9.50 holidays providing a further incentive to purchase the newspaper. Overall, this poster, which although is quite simple, is very effective in summing up everything the Sun represents, and more specifically, who its audience are. One thing that differs from other newspaper posters I've seen is the fact it contains quite a lot of text. However, you will not have to read all the text on the poster to completely understand what it's advertising. If you'd like to see any more examples of newspaper posters, then see my blog where there are 3 more. In order to help with my planning, I conducted a survey to ask my target audience. The questions were: are you male or female? What is your age? How often do you read newspapers? What makes you choose the newspaper you read, such as what attracts you, the price or the content? What story do you enjoy reading in a local newspaper? What main colours would you expect the colour scheme of a newspaper to be? What advertisements do you like to see or attract you in newspapers? What attracts you to read a headline? How many images do you expect to see on the front page? And how much do you expect to pay for a local newspaper? Many of these questions also had comment boxes included, so the people taking part could give helpful advice on the best way to design my newspaper. In total, 65 people took part, including 28 males and 36 females. 92% of these people were my target audience of 13 to 15. With the other 18% providing a good insight into the difference between younger and older audiences' expectations. I found that 68% read newspapers once a fortnight or more, therefore I think I'm going to go with a weekly newspaper, as this means I won't have to worry about attracting a daily audience. I found content was important. People were more likely to buy a cheap newspaper, and that having news was not politically biased was also important. I found that local news was the most important, but that people also valued regional, national and international news. The least popular were weather and health, so it was unlikely I'll make these prominent in my newspaper. Most people answered black and white, but for the masthead and coloured areas people answered blue or red. Whilst many people seemed not to like adverts, those who did preferred money off vouchers, closely followed by events, something to consider for the inside of my newspaper. Clothing, food and leisure activities were all of equal importance and therefore will be equally distributed. I became aware that this needed to be relevant to my audience, or perhaps something shocking or controversial, with the appearance of the headline being less relevant. There was a clear outcome from this question, around 3 pictures on the front page, 1 for the main story and 2 or 3 for sub-stories. This is not just for the price, but also determines how many adverts are included. 57.81% of people responded 55p or below, and as a majority, it is likely that my final total will be under this number, and perhaps even 3. Now I had to decide on a name for my newspaper, so I created a mind map with some ideas. One thing I felt was important was to include the name of the town, Wymondham, in the name, as it makes it clear it is a local newspaper. I came up with a range of ideas, taking examples of existing newspapers and adapting them to my own ideas. Eventually I decided to go with the Wymondham Times, as I felt the connotations of this were relevant to my audience, as it meant this newspaper will be up to date with the times and therefore interesting to a younger audience. What's also important is the colour scheme of my newspaper. Given my survey results, I had already narrowed it down to 2 colours, blue and red. However, as I did not want to be classed as a red top newspaper, I chose to opt for a soft blue colour and will use it for the coloured sections of my newspaper. I also experimented with the layout of my newspaper and came up with many ideas which you can see on my blog. This is likely to be the final layout of my newspaper. I have included elements of modern technologies such as Twitter and Facebook, along with a strapline. I have also chosen to just have one headline to make the page less cluttered and a main photograph to go with it. I will also include a what's inside section and an advert.